Well, thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I'm glad we could do it in person. I'm also glad that we're doing it after lunch. The last thing I ever like to do is encounter hangry reporters. So I want to thank you for putting me after lunch and not before. And after a great fiscal report, you know, I mean, everything is sound in Washington State's accounts, right? So I am Hilary Franz, the Commissioner of Public Lands, and happy to come here and talk. I was going to sort of present on three of our most significant bills. We have quite a number of asks, but thought I'd start with just three and then open up for questions. People would like.
You don't need to look back at me. Just
all right.
Have it.
All right. So I'll start with our cascading impacts of wildfire bill, which is Senate Bill 5611 and House Bill 1578. Specifically, we all know that we've seen throughout Washington State increasing wildfires, and not just on the east side of the state, but the west side. We're seeing year after year about 30 to 35% of the fires now in western Washington, and everybody, I'm sure, remembers the 8 significant fires on the west side in November. I even got a call from the Macaw tribe right before Thanksgiving, sending air resources out to them, and as you know, that is the coast right before Thanksgiving is a shock that we'd have fires out there. As we've seen increasing wildfires, we've made significant difference. Last year was a great year where we had only 173,000 acres burned, which is well below our 10-year average of 440,000 acres, and obviously well below the 800,000 and 1 million acres in 2015. We had about 1,500 fires. This year we are coming forward with the cascading impacts of wildfire bill that does a significant amount of resources before fires for communities, during fires, and post fires. Specifically, we will be expanding our work around really assessing the risk of wildfire in Washington State, the entire state, so that we can use those resources and information to help in fuels management, prescribed burn, as well as pre-positioning and having enough resources during fire season in the key locations where we know we're likely to have more fires. We also are expanding our Wildfire Ready Neighbors program. As we know, too often our residents and homeowners are surprised when fire's right at the door, but there are steps that they could be taking to make their homes, their neighborhoods, and their communities more resilient. We launched Wildfire Ready's Neighbor as a result of House Bill 1168 passing in 6 counties, eastern Washington. Well, as we now see, we also piloted in 3 counties in western Washington. And as we see more and more wildfires on the west side of the state, we've got to do more to help each one of the homeowners and neighborhoods in these high wildfire risk areas. So we'll bring it to the 3 counties we piloted, as well as expanding it to 5 more counties on the west side of the state that will help them. In addition to that, there's a key component there around evacuation planning. We haven't had the resources to truly work with our emergency response at the local level, as well as with state patrol and police and fire at the local level about evacuation planning. We'll bring our resources to that work so that we can help those high-risk wildfire communities know exactly what to do in case of a fire and where to go. As we all experienced last year and several years before that, Washington State seems to be the grounds for smoke, whether it's from our own state or whether it's California, Oregon, or BC's smoke coming to us, and it's impacting everyone. As we've seen roughly 3 years in the last 8 years where we had the worst smoke and air quality in the world from Spokane to Seattle. A key component of this will be actually integrating smoke readiness with our wildfire readiness program so we can help homeowners get resources and tools to making their home more weatherized, not just to cold, but also to smoke in the case of it. It'll also help on getting more monitoring and resources so people can be prepared for it before it comes and getting that information to our public health agencies. We also have a component in there that will bring resources to those high community centers where people can go for safe zones, especially our most vulnerable populations, whether it's our young children or seniors or people with bronchial, asthmatic, respiratory illnesses. Lastly is a key piece around what we call the bear teams, and that's not about cocaine bear or anything else. It is truly about our burned area response teams. We know that once a fire is put out, oftentimes we have storm events that leave those communities very much at risk. We have not had the resources to build the kind of burned area evacuation response teams to understand what that level of risk is, go into those areas, be able to communicate that to our first responders and our local governments This will build a program that doesn't exist today to help bring the local resources, the information they need about those risks, and be able to do it quickly right after a fire. In addition to that, I'm going to say one of the ones that probably people have the most amount of questions, since you all hear me talk about fire all the time. Next, I'll go to our removal of aquatic derelict structures. This is Senate Bill 5433, House Bill 1378. As we've seen throughout the state within the 2.6 million acres of aquatic lands that our agency manages, enormous amount of derelict vessels, vessels that have been left behind and abandoned that cause an enormous amount of environmental damage to our waterways, obviously to our salmon and orca. We moved a bill last year that passed that created funds where we will now have dedicated funds for removing these vessels. At the same time, we have aquatic derelict structures throughout our state, a significant amount of them. These are abandoned structures that were there a long, long time ago. They're no longer utilized. But we haven't had the statutory authority or the funding resources to go in and help remove those. They're no longer of use. They are honestly just creating a challenge in our waterways for our salmon and our critical fish and wildlife habitat, as well as limiting the ability for recreation and other boaters to use that area. So in this, we are specifically creating an aquatic derelict structures program, similar to our aquatic derelict vessels program, that gives us the proper tools to address and remove derelict structures on state-owned land. It also gives us funding in the capital budget to be able to remove what we're calling the Filthy Four. Triton American Pier out of Anacortes, Dickman Mill out of Tacoma, a former high-tide seafood pier in Nia Bay, as well as a pier that's been abandoned right outside of Ballard. We do believe this is a significant program that will go a long way to actually restoring critical habitat and removing what oftentimes is an eyesore as well as a fish sore. Lastly, I'll talk before questions on our carbon bill. This is Senate Bill 5688, House Bill 1789. As we know that Washington State has stepped up in passing the Climate Commitment Act, which now creates the opportunities for generating revenue and also a carbon offset program. At our agency, we are on the front lines of climate change every single day, whether it's the increasing wildfires, or it's the forests that are dying due to decay, disease, insect infestation. Our agricultural lands have seen dust storms and reduced ability for production. We have 1 million acres of agricultural land, as well as we're seeing sea level rise and ocean acidification. We are truly on the front lines of a rapidly changing climate. Our agency is tasked in managing 3 million acres of uplands for a responsibility to generate revenue for our schools and our counties, and we generate over $325 million biennium in that work. We are able in that work to sell everything from wood to apples to gooey decks to shellfish to wheat. We're the largest wheat producer, grapes. The only thing, we can even sell marijuana. The only thing we cannot sell is carbon. What we're asking for in this bill is the ability to do what the private sector is already doing. And what does that mean? So currently we have over 138,000 acres of forest land that is public lands that are managed on behalf of our schools and counties that have burned in the last decade. Only 20% of that land has actually been reforested because we don't have the resources to go back and replant that area. Not only is that losing in the long-term timber value of that land, but it's also reducing the value that land provides for the environment, whether it's clean air and clean water or the context of carbon sequestration. Private sectors already, in many places in California, companies like Sierra Pacific that were seriously impacted by the Dixie Fire and other fires, over 60,000 acres plus, they've gone to the carbon markets to actually pay for the reforestation of those areas that have burned. We're asking for the ability to do the same thing on behalf of our schools and our counties. Another example would be we have land that's fallow, that used to be prime forest land that was harvested, that's in our portfolio, that we could go and secure funding from the carbon markets to fund planting it and make it prime, high-value working forest land and generate revenue that we can't today for those counties and schools. Additional example is forest resiliency, the ability to go in there and do silviculture and fuse treatment that ensures that those forests stay healthier for the long term and provide greater value for their production in wood, Addition, we have the ability as we see a rapid conversion of our working forest land. Over 400,000 acres have been lost in the last 20 years, with 600,000 likely to be lost in the next 20 years, which impacts our local rural economies. It impacts our mills. It impacts the ability to have a wood source here that we depend on, especially as we see a housing crisis and the need for more wood and more buildings. This would enable us to actually secure those properties, bring them into the trust portfolio, and ensure that we're keeping working forests working, keeping the mills working, and have it. We also have the ability to go to kelp, sell kelp, as we've seen over 60% of our kelp lost in the Puget Sound, 80% just in the South Sound, which is critical habitat for our fish and wildlife. We could sell kelp at $35 a ton, which would help reforest our aquatic lands. And the beauty of all of this is we don't have to go to the general fund, to taxpayers, to fund this work, and instead use those carbon markets on behalf of our schools and counties and better management and stewardship of our lands. It also reduces those funds then could have been put to housing and education and other health, housing, and human services. Additional examples, believe it or not, we got rocks, a lot of rocks. In Skamania especially, we got some amazing basalt rocks, okay? Nobody wants to buy my rocks, right? They sit on that land, they're not generating any revenue. We've got companies who have found that our basalt rock is some of the most amazing rock to store carbon, and believe it or not, you can now pump carbon into rocks and it will store it, and I can make money on rocks for our kids. So besides, as I say, drink more red for public ed, use our rocks. I don't know a rhyme yet for our kids. Happy to take questions on any of those. Urban forestry is another bill we have moving forward. We can use our carbon markets also to secure more funding for urban forestry. It's a big, significant bill as we see throughout our state. Many of our communities have a dearth of tree canopy, which is impacting their air quality, their water quality. In addition to the fact that it's leading to more stormwater runoff, and we truly have an issue where we have a huge disparity in communities of color and low-income communities, especially during the heat dome that we all experienced, where over 112 people tragically died in Washington State. So we have a funding request in our package on that. But I'm happy to take questions. I love it. You just shot